I'm April, and I'm 28 years old. Last week, my sister Jessica called me worthless during what was supposed to be a family reconciliation dinner. She hung up when I mentioned that my company just acquired her husband's failing construction business. "You always were a pathetic liar," she'd screamed before the line went dead. I calmly finished my wine and signed the termination papers for her husband's employment. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt underestimated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Growing up wealthy should have been a blessing, but in our house, money came with conditions. My parents, Richard and Patricia, ran their family like a business. Performance metrics included grades, appearance, and most importantly, maintaining their vision of perfection. Our mansion in Connecticut had everything except warmth: 23 rooms, Italian marble floors, and not a single spot where I felt welcome. The first crack in their perfect family facade appeared when I was 14 and told them I was attracted to girls. We were sitting in our formal dining room, the one reserved for important conversations, when I finally worked up the courage to speak my truth. Mom was serving her famous lemon cake, the kind that looked beautiful but tasted like cardboard. Appropriate, considering how most things in our house looked perfect but felt empty. My mother's face went white, then red, then settled into an expression I'd never seen before. Pure disgust. "That's not who we raised you to be," she said, her voice colder than our marble floors. My father simply walked out of the room. I can still hear his footsteps echoing down the hallway, getting fainter until the front door slammed shut. From that moment, I became the family embarrassment. My 17-year-old sister Jessica suddenly got a bigger allowance while mine was cut completely. She went from $500 a month to $800, while I went to zero. "You want to be different? Learn to support yourself," Dad announced at the next family meeting, which was basically a monthly performance review disguised as dinner. The message was clear: conform or be cast out. Jessica, with her blonde highlights and perfect grades and appropriate boyfriend, represented everything they wanted in a daughter. I, with my messy brown hair and inappropriate attractions, represented their worst nightmare. Family dinners became performances where I played the invisible child. Jessica would regale them with stories about her boyfriend Brad, who played lacrosse and whose father owned 3 car dealerships. She'd describe her college applications to prestigious schools, her bright future as a society wife. Meanwhile, I ate in silence, watching them celebrate everything that excluded me. When Christmas came around that year, Dad raised his glass to toast our perfect family while looking directly past me. I might as well have been a piece of furniture. Actually, they probably would have shown more appreciation for a nice armchair. The only person who noticed was Grandpa Theodore, my mother's father. He was an odd man, quiet and thoughtful, who'd made his fortune in technology investments decades before anyone understood what that meant. While everyone else avoided me like I had something contagious, he'd slip me $20 bills and ask about school. "The real treasure isn't what others see," he'd tell me, his eyes twinkling with some secret knowledge. "It's what you carry inside yourself." At the time, I thought he was just being philosophical. Looking back, I wonder if he was dropping hints about something much bigger. When I mentioned wanting to apply for college, my parents' response was swift and brutal. "College costs money," Mom said, examining her manicured nails as if my future was less interesting than her cuticles. "Money we spend on family members who represent our values." The implication was clear: change who you are, or fund your own future. I tried working for my uncle's construction company during summer break. Uncle Marcus owned half the commercial real estate in the county, but you wouldn't know it from how he treated family. "You work here?" he laughed when I asked, actually slapping his knee like I'd told the world's funniest joke. Maybe as a cleaning lady, but even then. His rejection stung, but it also lit a fire in me that wouldn't go out. That fire led me to apply for every scholarship I could find. While Jessica planned her debutante ball, complete with a designer dress that cost more than some people's cars, I wrote essays and studied for entrance exams. The day I got a full ride to State University, Grandpa was the first person I told. His eyes actually sparkled with pride, like I'd just announced I'd won the Nobel Prize. "That's my girl," he said, pulling me into one of his rare hugs. Theodore Roosevelt said, "Believe you can, and you're halfway there." You just proved him right. It was the first time anyone in my family had acted proud of my achievements. Of course, it was also the last time for many years. Moving to campus felt like breathing for the first time. Away from their suffocating expectations, I could finally be myself. I majored in business administration and threw myself into studying, determined to prove I didn't need their money or approval to succeed. My dorm room was smaller than my childhood closet, but it felt like a palace because it was mine. That's where I met Sarah, a literature major with laugh lines and hands that gestured wildly when she talked about books. She was everything my family would hate: liberal, outspoken, and absolutely brilliant. She read poetry for fun and believed in causes my parents called trendy nonsense. We started as study partners and quickly became inseparable. Sarah came from a working-class family in Michigan. Her dad was a mechanic, her mom worked at the local library, and they somehow managed to send 3 kids to college on love and determination. The first time she described a family dinner where everyone actually listened to each other and laughed at the same jokes, I nearly cried. I hadn't realized families could function that way. When I finally worked up the courage to tell Grandpa about Sarah during one of our monthly phone calls, I braced for disappointment. Instead, he chuckled. "About time you found someone who appreciates your spirit," he said. "Bring her around for dinner sometime. I'd like to meet the girl who makes you sound so happy." My family never asked about my college life, which made it easier to keep Sarah's secret from them. During holidays, I'd return home and perform the role of the reformed daughter, while carefully avoiding any topics that might reveal my relationship. I became an expert at deflection, always steering conversations toward Jessica's latest accomplishments or Mom's charity work. Grandpa, however, made an effort to visit campus. He'd take Sarah and me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, asking her thoughtful questions about her studies and treating her like family. He was genuinely interested in her thesis on contemporary American poetry and remembered details from previous conversations. He even offered to help with expenses if we needed anything. "Education is the one investment that always pays dividends," he'd say, pressing an envelope of cash into my hands that I was too proud to use but too grateful to refuse. Sarah would always insist I keep it, understanding that pride was sometimes all I had left. "You know," he told me during one visit, "I've been watching cryptocurrency markets. Fascinating technology. Most people think it's just internet money, but I believe it's the future." I nodded politely, though I had no idea what he was talking about. Grandpa had always been ahead of the curve with technology investments. While other people his age were still figuring out email, he was trading stocks online and researching companies most people had never heard of. Those college years were the happiest of my life. I maintained a perfect GPA while working part-time tutoring other students in business courses. Sarah and I planned a future together, talking late into the night about the life we'd build after graduation. We'd sketch out apartment layouts on notebook paper and debate whether we wanted a dog or a cat first. The only shadow was knowing my family would never accept her, or us. But for the first time in my life, their approval didn't feel like life or death. I was building something that belonged to me. Senior year brought job interviews and the looming reality of post-graduation life. I'd secured a position with a small consulting firm in the city, nothing glamorous but enough to support myself. The salary was modest by my family's standards but felt like freedom to me. Sarah had been accepted to graduate school across the country, which meant difficult decisions ahead. During spring break, I finally decided to tell my family about Sarah. Not because I expected acceptance, but because I was tired of hiding. The exhaustion of constantly monitoring my words, of editing my stories to remove any trace of my real life, had become unbearable. I drove home with my stomach in knots, rehearsing conversations that I knew would end badly. The announcement went exactly as predicted. We were in the living room, that sterile showcase of expensive furniture that no one was allowed to actually use. Mom dropped her coffee cup, staining her precious white Persian rug. I have to admit, watching that perfect circle of brown spread across all that pristine white felt oddly satisfying. Dad's face turned purple with rage, a color that clashed terribly with his expensive shirt. Jessica smirked like she'd won some contest, already reaching for her phone to document the family drama. "So, you're still determined to embarrass this family?" Mom said, her voice shaking with fury. "I'm determined to be honest," I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. "Sarah is wonderful, and I love her." The word love seemed to physically pain them. Dad stood up so abruptly his chair toppled backward, a dramatic gesture that would have been more impressive if it hadn't been such expensive furniture. "You're no daughter of mine," he declared, and for the first time, those words didn't devastate me. They felt like freedom. Jessica pulled out her phone, probably texting friends about the family drama unfolding. Mom started crying, though whether from disappointment or embarrassment I couldn't tell. Knowing her, it was probably concern about what the neighbors would think. "This is what we get for being too permissive," Dad continued, pacing around the room like a caged animal. "We should have sent you to boarding school when this started," as if my sexuality was some sort of behavioral problem that could have been corrected with enough discipline. Only Grandpa's reaction mattered. When I called him that evening, dreading another rejection, he surprised me again. "I'm proud of you for being brave," he said simply. "Living authentically takes courage most people never find." He invited Sarah and me to dinner the following week, treating her with the warmth and respect my parents had never shown anyone I cared about. He asked about her family, her studies, her plans for the future. Over dessert, he pulled out his phone and showed us photos from his latest travels. "Been to Singapore," he said, scrolling through pictures of gleaming skyscrapers and bustling markets. "Learning about digital currencies. Amazing what technology can do these days." He showed us photos of himself at some sort of technology conference, looking completely out of place among all those young tech entrepreneurs, but absolutely fascinated by everything around him. Have you ever experienced a moment when you realized your real family wasn't the people you were born to, but the ones who chose to love you exactly as you are? Grandpa's health had been declining quietly, something he'd hidden from most of the family with typical stubborn pride. Only I noticed his increasing fatigue during our dinners, the way he'd pause mid-sentence sometimes, searching for words that used to come easily. His hands, once steady enough to thread a needle, had developed a slight tremor that he tried to hide by keeping them busy. When he collapsed at home in early December, I was the first person the hospital called. I drove straight there while my parents debated whether the timing was convenient for their social calendar. They had a charity gala that weekend and weren't sure if a family emergency would be an acceptable excuse to miss it. He passed peacefully 3 days later, holding my hand while my parents argued with doctors about treatment options that were no longer relevant. They kept demanding second opinions and experimental treatments, unable to accept that sometimes money can't fix everything. His last words to me were, "Remember what I told you about real treasure." I thought he meant the life lessons, the wisdom about being authentic. The funeral was a circus of fake grief and social positioning. The church was packed with people who hadn't spoken to Grandpa in years, but wanted to be seen at the event. My parents played the devastated children while Jessica posted Instagram stories about loss and family bonds, complete with carefully curated photos that made her look appropriately somber. I sat in the back, genuinely mourning the only person who'd ever truly seen me. While everyone else delivered rehearsed eulogies about Grandpa's business acumen and community involvement, I remembered quiet dinners where he actually listened to my opinions and treated them as valuable. The will reading happened a week later in Grandpa's lawyer's office. The mahogany conference room felt more like a theater, with my parents, aunts, uncles, and cousins arranging themselves like an eager audience waiting for a performance. Even Jessica brought her boyfriend, as if inheriting money was a spectator sport that required emotional support. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was an elderly man who'd known Grandpa for decades. He read through the bequests with professional detachment, but I caught him glancing at me occasionally with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Mom inherited the Connecticut house, a sprawling colonial worth millions. Dad got the investment portfolio, diversified stocks and bonds that would keep him comfortable for life. Various cousins received vintage cars, jewelry, and substantial cash amounts. Jessica squealed when she learned about her new BMW and trust fund that would pay for her lifestyle indefinitely. Uncle Marcus got a chunk of commercial real estate. Aunt Claire received enough money to retire early and pursue her dream of opening an art gallery. Then came my portion. To my granddaughter April, who taught me that courage comes in many forms, I leave $2 in digital currency, stored in an account she'll find when she's ready. The room erupted. Uncle Marcus actually slapped his knee, laughing so hard he started coughing. $2 whole! Jessica gasped between giggles. He really knew what you were worth. Mom looked embarrassed, as if my inheritance somehow reflected poorly on her parenting skills. Maybe it's a joke, suggested Aunt Claire, though she didn't sound convinced. Theodore always had an odd sense of humor. Several cousins were openly snickering, whispering among themselves about how appropriate it was that the family disappointment got disappointed. But I knew Grandpa never did anything without purpose. Every decision he'd made in business, every investment, every relationship had been calculated and intentional. Still, $2 felt like a final insult, proof that even he'd seen through my pretenses and found me lacking. Mr. Henderson handed me a sealed envelope after everyone left. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this privately," he said. Inside was a handwritten note. "The value isn't in the amount, it's in the understanding. Be patient. Grandpa." I had no idea what it meant, but I tucked it away with the legal documents and tried to move on. I graduated 2 weeks later with honors, but no family in attendance. They were too busy planning how to spend their windfalls to celebrate my achievements. Jessica was already shopping for a new wardrobe to go with her trust fund lifestyle, while my parents debated whether to renovate their inherited house or sell it and buy something even more impressive. Sarah threw me a small party with friends who'd become my chosen family, but the sting of Grandpa's bequest lingered. Everyone kept asking what I'd inherited, and saying $2 always got the same reaction. Confusion followed by awkward silence. Eventually, I started lying and saying I hadn't been mentioned in the will at all. The next few years blurred together in a haze of 60-hour work weeks and careful budgeting. My consulting job paid enough for a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood and basic expenses, but luxuries were rare. While Jessica posted photos from European vacations funded by her trust fund, I clipped coupons and shopped sales. Sarah and I maintained our relationship long distance for 2 years before the strain became too much. Video calls couldn't replace physical presence, and the financial stress of traveling to see each other took its toll. We parted amicably, both acknowledging that geography and money had worn us down. She sent me postcards from her adventures in graduate school, and I sent updates about my slowly advancing career. My family occasionally surfaced in my life like unwelcome ghosts. Christmas cards with photos that didn't include me arrived every December, showing them gathered around expensive trees and expensive clothes, their smiles as perfectly arranged as everything else in their lives. Wedding invitations addressed only to April Walsh with no +1 option arrived sporadically. Jessica's engagement party was the final straw. I wasn't invited but heard about it through social media posts from cousins who seemed surprised by my absence. Apparently, it was a lavish affair at the country club, with ice sculptures and live music. The photos showed Jessica glowing in a designer dress, surrounded by family members I'd once considered my own. I threw myself into work, earning promotions and building a reputation for solving complex problems. My colleagues respected my analytical mind and work ethic, though I kept my personal life carefully compartmentalized. The shy girl who'd once tutored classmates had evolved into a confident professional, but inside I still felt like the family disappointment carrying around Grandpa's mysterious $2 inheritance. During quiet moments, usually late at night in my tiny apartment, I'd think about Grandpa's final words and wonder what he'd really meant. The lawyer had mentioned digital currency, but I'd never received any account information or passwords. Maybe the whole thing had been his way of making a point about my worth in the family hierarchy. $2 felt about right for how they'd always valued me. 3 years after his death, I moved to a slightly better apartment and started dating again. Life felt stable, if not exciting. I had work friends, a small social circle, and enough money to take occasional weekend trips. It wasn't the life I'd dreamed of in college, but it was mine. No one could take it away from me or use it to control me. The mystery of Grandpa's inheritance faded into background noise. Just another disappointment in a life that had taught me to expect very little from the people who were supposed to love me most. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, 7 years after Grandpa's death. I was cleaning out old files, preparing for a work presentation, when I found a folder labeled Family Documents buried deep in my desktop files. Most of it was tax information and old bills, digital clutter I'd been meaning to organize for months. Inside was a message I'd saved but never opened, sent from an address I didn't recognize on the day of the will reading. My email system had automatically sorted it into a subfolder for possible spam, which explained why I'd never seen it. The subject line read, Theodore Walsh, Final Instructions. Dear April, it began, your grandfather asked me to send this when you were ready. He said you'd know the right time. The account information is below. He said you'd understand when the time was right. M. Henderson. Below was a string of numbers and letters that meant nothing to me, along with a website address I'd never seen. The whole thing looked like gibberish, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the site and entered the information, half expecting to be redirected to some sort of scam or virus. Instead, I found myself navigating through several screens of technical jargon about digital wallets and encryption protocols. The interface looked legitimate but confusing, with warnings about secure passwords and backup codes. I followed the prompts carefully, creating new security credentials and answering verification questions. When the final screen loaded, a balance appeared that made me blink and refresh the page. Then I refreshed it again. Then I closed my browser and reopened it, thinking there must be some mistake. My $2 in digital currency was now worth $847 million. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered, reading and rereading the number. 847 million. Not thousand, not 100,000. Million, with an M. The kind of money that appeared in Forbes magazine articles about tech billionaires and oil executives. My hands started shaking as I researched Bitcoin price history, confirming what I could barely believe. Grandpa hadn't given me pocket change. He'd given me 2 Bitcoins when they were worth $1 each, back in 2010 when almost nobody understood cryptocurrency. Those worthless coins had grown exponentially over 7 years, while I'd struggled to pay rent and student loans. I called in sick to work, something I'd never done unless I was actually dying, and spent the day researching how to access and manage the account. The process was complex, requiring multiple security measures and technical knowledge I had to learn quickly. Online forums and tutorials became my crash course in cryptocurrency management. By evening, I'd successfully transferred the bitcoins to a more secure wallet under my control. I'd also learned that I was now wealthier than my parents, than anyone in my family, than most people in the world. The girl they'd deemed worthless now controlled more money than they'd see in multiple lifetimes. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment and cried, not from joy or relief, but from grief for Grandpa, who'd seen my potential when nobody else could. He'd known exactly what he was doing when he left me that insulting inheritance. While everyone else laughed at my $2, he'd been securing my future in a way that would take years for me to understand. The note made sense now. The value isn't in the amount, it's in the understanding. He'd been right, as usual. I just hadn't been ready to understand until now. I quit my job the next morning, claiming a family emergency. Technically true, since I was about to become the emergency my family never saw coming. I spent 2 weeks researching investment strategies, tax implications, and legal protections. Overnight wealth required careful planning, especially when you had enemies who'd once been relatives. My first call was to a wealth management firm that specialized in high-net-worth individuals. The advisor, a polished woman named Margaret, tried to hide her surprise when I walked into her office wearing my best suit, which had come from a discount rack. "How can we help you today, Miss Walsh?" she asked, probably expecting me to inquire about a small investment account. When I showed her the account balance, her composure cracked. "This is substantial," she said, which I assumed was wealth manager speak for holy shit. Within hours, I had a team of advisors helping me structure my assets, minimize tax liability, and create multiple layers of legal protection. My first major purchase was a ring for Sarah. We'd reconnected 6 months earlier through social media, our relationship rekindling stronger than before despite the years apart. She was finishing her doctorate in California, completely unaware of my changed circumstances. I flew out to surprise her, carrying an engagement ring that cost more than my old annual salary. "April?" She opened her apartment door, eyes wide with surprise. "What are you doing here? Don't you have work?" I dropped to one knee right there in her doorway, pulling out the ring box with hands that barely trembled. "Sarah Martinez, will you marry me and help me spend $800 million? She thought I was joking until I showed her the account balances on my phone. Then she thought I was having a breakdown. "April, where did this money come from? Did you rob a bank? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Finally, after an hour of explanations and documentation, she believed me. Her response was perfectly Sarah. "Well, that explains why you've been so calm about your job lately." We were married 3 weeks later on a private beach in Hawaii, just the two of us and an officiant who specialized in intimate ceremonies. The wedding photos I posted on social media showed an intimate ceremony with no family members present, which probably looked odd to anyone who didn't know our history. Not one comment from any Walsh relatives, which suited me perfectly. The real fun began when I started shopping for a business to buy. Grandpa's company, Walsh Industries, had been struggling since Dad took over operations. He'd made several poor decisions, lost major clients, and was reportedly considering bankruptcy. The company Grandpa had built from nothing was dying under my father's leadership. Perfect. Time to save the family business and watch their faces when they realized who their savior was. What do you think will happen next when a family that rejected their daughter discovers she's now powerful enough to save or destroy everything they hold dear? I established a holding company called TP Investments, named after Theodore Peter Walsh, my grandfather's full name. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using his initials to acquire the company he'd built while his son ran it into the ground. Through a series of carefully structured legal maneuvers, I began acquiring Walsh Industries stock from shareholders who'd lost confidence in Dad's leadership. The process took 3 months of working with investment lawyers and financial advisors who thought I was some tech heiress they'd never heard of. Let them wonder. My identity remained protected behind layers of corporate structure and confidentiality agreements. I learned to speak their language: diversified portfolios, strategic acquisitions, market positioning. Money, it turned out, was an excellent teacher. Meanwhile, Sarah and I planned our real wedding celebration. Since our families had shown no interest in our relationship, we decided to throw ourselves a party that would be impossible to ignore. The venue was a private estate in the Hamptons, the kind of place that required a waiting list and several references just to book. I hired a documentary photographer whose work regularly appeared in high society magazines, knowing the pictures would eventually surface online where my cousins would inevitably see them. Sarah looked stunning in a custom dress designed by someone whose name made the wedding planner actually gasp. I wore a suit tailored by the same designer who dressed European royalty. The party itself was magnificent: champagne fountains, live orchestras, and cuisine prepared by celebrity chefs whose restaurants had year-long waiting lists. Every detail was documented and shared across social media platforms, where my family would eventually stumble across them and wonder who was funding such extravagance. But the real masterpiece was my acquisition of Walsh Industries. By the time Dad realized what was happening, I controlled 60% of the company's stock. The remaining shareholders, desperate to recoup their losses, had practically thrown their shares at me. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss the hostile takeover, never suspecting that their new majority shareholder was the daughter they'd disowned. I spent the morning of the board meeting getting ready like I was preparing for battle. I chose a charcoal business suit that cost more than my parents spent on groceries in a year, and carried a briefcase that contained legal documents that would reshape my family forever. Walking into that boardroom felt like stepping onto a stage where I'd been rehearsing my lines for years. Dad's face went white when he saw me, then red, then settled into confusion. April, what are you doing here? This is a private board meeting. I'm here to save Grandpa's company, I said calmly, taking the seat at the head of the table that had once been his, and to relieve you of the responsibility you've clearly found overwhelming. The lawyer sitting beside me opened his briefcase and began distributing documents that would prove I wasn't just visiting. The silence in that room was beautiful. Years of rejection, dismissal, and condescension crystallized into one perfect moment of recognition. The family disappointment had just become their boss. The board meeting was delicious chaos, like watching a perfectly choreographed dance of panic and disbelief. Dad stuttered through explanations while I presented a detailed plan for restructuring the company. I'd spent weeks preparing, hiring consultants and analysts to identify every flaw in his management strategy. "This is impossible," he kept saying, shuffling through documents like they might rearrange themselves into something more palatable. "Where did you get this kind of money? How did you even know about our financial situation?" Mom actually gasped when the lawyer explained that I now owned controlling interest in their family business. She'd never attended a board meeting before, but somehow managed to get herself invited to this one. Probably thought she was coming to watch Dad handle a minor business inconvenience, not witness her daughter's corporate coup. "How is this possible?" Uncle Marcus demanded, his face turning an unflattering shade of purple. "Where did you get this kind of money?" I smiled, remembering his rejection when I'd asked for a summer job years earlier. The same man who'd suggested I might be suitable for cleaning toilets was now demanding explanations from me. "Let's just say I made some very good investments," I replied, enjoying the way his mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, with guidance from someone who understood the value of thinking ahead. Jessica, who'd somehow gotten herself added to the board despite having no business experience beyond spending money, kept staring at me like I'd grown a second head. She was wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people's cars, funded by her trust fund lifestyle. "This has to be illegal," she whispered to Mom, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Normal people don't just become millionaires overnight." The irony was perfect. Jessica, who'd inherited her wealth without lifting a finger, was questioning the legitimacy of my success. The vote to install me as CEO was technically unanimous, though several family members abstained rather than support my appointment. They didn't have much choice. I controlled the majority of shares, and the company was hemorrhaging money fast enough that they needed someone who actually knew what they were doing. Within 6 months, I'd turned Walsh Industries around completely. I brought in new management, people who'd been recommended by the best headhunters money could buy. We secured major contracts with companies that had written off Walsh Industries as a lost cause. I implemented efficiency improvements that boosted profits by 40% in the first quarter. Sarah, with her fresh doctorate in organizational psychology, became our head of human resources and culture transformation. She brought the same analytical mind she'd applied to her thesis, identifying toxic management practices and replacing them with systems that actually motivated employees. The business press started noticing our success story. "Mystery Heiress Saves Family Company," read one headline. "Young CEO's Remarkable Turnaround," proclaimed another. My parents watched from the sidelines as their daughter rebuilt their legacy better than they ever had. The best part was watching them try to figure out my financial situation. They knew I'd been working a modest consulting job, living in a studio apartment, driving a Honda with a dent in the passenger door. The sudden transformation baffled them completely. Christmas arrived with an unprecedented flood of invitations. Cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years suddenly wanted to host family dinners. Jessica called twice asking if I needed help managing my new responsibilities. Even my parents sent a formal invitation to their annual holiday party, the same event they'd excluded me from for over a decade. I declined them all politely and spent Christmas in Switzerland with Sarah, posting photos from our luxury ski resort while my family gathered to speculate about my mysterious fortune. The pictures showed us laughing on slopes that cost more per day than most people made in a month. The investigation began subtly, like a poorly executed spy movie. Dad hired a private investigator named Frank Morrison, a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud cases. Frank spent weeks researching my background, convinced he'd uncover evidence of illegal activity that would explain my sudden wealth. Uncle Marcus started asking former colleagues about my consulting work, searching for evidence of hidden income streams or suspicious business deals. He even called my old boss, claiming to be considering me for a business opportunity, while pumping him for information about my financial situation. Jessica created fake social media accounts to monitor my posts for clues. She followed my Instagram under the name BeachLover2019 and my LinkedIn as Business Pro CT. Not exactly mastermind-level espionage, but points for effort, I suppose. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find except the truth they couldn't imagine. Their family disappointment had become richer than all of them combined, through an inheritance they'd laughed at for 7 years. Meanwhile, wedding invitations started arriving like clockwork. Cousins I barely knew suddenly wanted me at their celebrations. Second cousins who'd never acknowledged my existence were sending elaborate invitations with hand-calligraphed envelopes. Jessica announced her engagement and specifically requested that I attend her engagement party, despite not inviting me to anything for years. The invitation was particularly ironic, considering she'd posted photos from her previous engagement party specifically to show me what I was missing. The most desperate attempt came from Mom, who showed up at my office unannounced on a Thursday afternoon. My assistant tried to turn her away, but I was curious enough to see what elaborate performance she'd prepared. She perched nervously in my executive chair, clutching her purse like a shield against uncomfortable questions. "April, honey, I think we need to talk," she began, using an endearment I hadn't heard since childhood. The word honey sounded foreign in her mouth, like she was speaking a language she'd forgotten years ago. I leaned back in my leather chair, the same chair Grandpa had used when he ran this company. His presence felt strong in that moment, like he was watching this conversation unfold with the same mixture of amusement and disappointment he'd shown toward family drama. "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked, genuinely curious about what revisionist history she'd constructed. "Well, we never meant to make you feel unwelcome," she said, rewriting history with impressive creativity. "We were just trying to teach you independence. We're so proud of what you've accomplished." The gaslighting was masterful, worthy of an Academy Award for Best Performance in a dramatic reversal of previously stated positions. But I'd had years to build immunity to their manipulation. "Mom, you told me I wasn't family when I came out. Dad said I was no daughter of his. Those weren't misunderstandings. They were clear statements about where I stood with you." She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, probably realizing that her usual tactics weren't going to work on someone who now had enough money to ignore her completely. "People say things in anger," she tried, waving her hand dismissively. "But we're family, April. Blood is thicker than water." "Funny how blood only matters when money is involved," I replied, enjoying the way her smile faltered. Where was this family loyalty when I was struggling to pay for college? When I was working 60-hour weeks just to make rent? She had no answer for that, so she tried a different approach. "Jessica is getting married next month. It would mean so much to her if you came to the wedding. She's always looked up to you." That was such a blatant lie I almost laughed out loud. Jessica had spent years treating me like a family embarrassment, rolling her eyes whenever I spoke, and making sure everyone knew she considered me beneath her station. The wedding invitation arrived engraved on expensive cardstock that probably cost more per square inch than my old apartment rent. My name was written in calligraphy that looked like it belonged in a museum, surrounded by little flourishes that screamed, "We have money to waste on fancy lettering." The envelope also contained a handwritten note from Jessica. "April, I know we haven't always been close, but I'd love for you to be part of my special day. Maybe we could grab lunch and catch up?" The handwriting was careful and deliberate, like she'd practiced it several times to get the tone just right. I showed the note to Sarah over dinner at our favorite restaurant, a small Italian place that had become our regular spot for important conversations. "She's never wanted to catch up before," I observed, twirling pasta around my fork. "What changed?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, the same expression she'd used in college when professors made particularly obvious points. "Your net worth changed. Everything else stayed the same." The desperation became more obvious when Dad called directly, something he'd never done before in my adult life. He'd always preferred to communicate through Mom when absolutely necessary, treating direct conversation with me like something to be avoided whenever possible. "April, we need to discuss your role in the family business going forward," he said, his voice carefully modulated to sound professional rather than paternal, as if we were colleagues instead of father and daughter. "What role?" I asked innocently, leaning back in my home office chair. "I'm the CEO." "You're the former CEO who nearly bankrupted Grandpa's company." The silence stretched uncomfortably before he cleared his throat. "I think there's been some confusion about our family dynamics," he said, echoing Mom's earlier attempt at revisionist history. "We've always supported your independence. We're proud parents watching their daughter succeed." The lies came so easily, I wondered if he actually believed them, or if he'd simply practiced them enough times that they felt like truth. Dad, you haven't spoken to me voluntarily in 8 years. You've missed every milestone in my adult life. The only thing that's changed is your perception of my bank account. His voice hardened slightly, revealing the man I remembered from my childhood. Money doesn't change the fact that we're family. That's where he was wrong. Money had changed everything, but not in the way he assumed. It hadn't made me love them more or forgive their years of rejection. It had simply given me the power to ignore them completely, to build a life where their approval was irrelevant. But I wasn't ready to ignore them yet. Not when I could finally watch them squirm the way they'd made me squirm for years. You're right, I said sweetly, using the same tone Mom employed when delivering particularly cutting social observations. We are family. Just like we were family when you cut my allowance for being gay. Just like we were family when you told me I wasn't worth college tuition. Family means different things to different people, doesn't it? The harassment escalated after that conversation. Relatives I'd never met started reaching out through social media, claiming they'd always wanted a relationship with me but hadn't known how to reach out. These were people who'd had my contact information for years but had never bothered to use it. Cousins sent friend requests accompanied by long messages about how much they'd missed me at family gatherings I'd never been invited to attend. Aunt Claire, who'd ignored me for a decade, suddenly wanted to reconnect over coffee and catch up on old times. But the most revealing moment came when Uncle Marcus approached me at a coffee shop near my office. He'd clearly been waiting for me, sitting at a corner table with newspapers spread out as camouflage like a detective in a bad movie. April! Uncle Marcus stood up as I walked past, his performance of surprise so over the top it belonged in a high school theater production. What a coincidence! Mind if I join you? I minded very much, but curiosity won over common sense. This was the same uncle who'd refused to hire me as a teenager, suggesting I might be suitable for cleaning toilets if I was lucky. Now here he was, practically bouncing with eagerness to talk to me. He settled into the chair across from me, ordering an expensive latte and trying to project casual confidence. His suit was freshly pressed, and he'd clearly gotten a haircut for the occasion. The whole presentation screamed, "Important businessman," which was ironic considering his construction company was reportedly struggling. "I've been following your success with Walsh Industries," he began, leaning forward with the intensity of someone about to share state secrets. "Remarkable turnaround. Your grandfather would be proud." The irony was delicious. Marcus had spent years dismissing Grandpa as an eccentric old man whose investment theories were outdated and impractical. He'd openly mocked Grandpa's interest in technology and predicted that his crazy experiments would bankrupt the family. "I'm sure he would be," I agreed, sipping my coffee slowly. He always believed in investing in the future, even when other people couldn't see the potential. Marcus nodded eagerly, missing the subtle insult entirely. "About that," he said, producing a folder from his briefcase with the flourish of a magician revealing his best trick. "I've been thinking about expanding my construction business. With your expertise and resources, we could create something really special. Family partnership, you know." There it was. The real reason for this coincidental meeting. Marcus wanted access to my money, wrapped in the language of family loyalty he'd never shown before. I let him pitch his vision of our collaboration while internally marveling at his audacity. His proposal was elaborate. A joint venture that would leverage my financial resources and his construction expertise to develop luxury properties across Connecticut. He'd prepared charts and projections, market analyses, and architectural sketches. The presentation was actually impressive if you ignored the fact that his current business was failing. "It sounds like a fascinating opportunity," I said when he finished, my voice carefully neutral. "I'll have my investment team analyze the proposal." His face lit up with premature victory, probably already planning how to spend money he didn't have yet. "Of course, they'll need to see your complete financial records, business plan, and probably conduct due diligence on your management history," I added casually, watching his enthusiasm dim like a light bulb losing power. Marcus had been cutting corners and dodging creditors for years, something my preliminary investigation had already uncovered. His business was nearly as troubled as Walsh Industries had been under Dad's leadership, sustained mostly by family connections and creative accounting. 3 days later, my assistant sent him a polite rejection letter, citing incompatible investment criteria and insufficient due diligence documentation. I never heard from him again, though I did hear through the grapevine that he'd started telling people I was too arrogant for family business. The pattern repeated with every family member who came crawling back. They all wanted something: money, connections, forgiveness, or simply association with my success. None of them offered genuine relationship or acknowledged their past behavior. The final revelation came at Jessica's wedding, which I attended despite every instinct telling me to stay away. Sarah and I arrived in a car that cost more than most people's houses, a sleek black vehicle with a driver who treated us like visiting royalty. We were dressed in designer clothes that probably cost more than the wedding itself. Sarah looked stunning in a navy dress that had been featured in Vogue, while I wore a suit that made me feel like I could conquer the world. The entire family watched us enter, whispers following our movement through the crowd like ripples in water. Jessica's smile was so forced it looked painful, like she was trying to solve a math problem with her facial muscles. "April, you came!" she squealed, air kissing near my cheeks without actually making contact. "And you look amazing. That suit must have cost a fortune." Even at her own wedding, she couldn't resist probing about my finances. Money had become the only lens through which my family could see me, the only aspect of my existence that held their interest. During the reception, I overheard Mom talking to relatives about my mysterious inheritance and lucky investments. She was still trying to solve the puzzle of my wealth, spinning theories that ranged from lottery winnings to secret business deals. The truth was too simple for her to consider. The grandfather she'd dismissed had seen potential in the granddaughter she'd rejected. The truth hit me with perfect clarity as I watched them perform their fake acceptance. They would never genuinely love or respect me. Their interest was purely transactional, based on what I could provide rather than who I was. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. "Ready to go?" she whispered. I nodded and we slipped out during the cake cutting, leaving behind a family that had never really been mine. 6 months later, I established the Theodore Walsh Foundation, dedicating $50 million to supporting LGBTQ+ youth whose families had rejected them. The announcement made national news, complete with photos of scholarship recipients and their inspiring stories of resilience and success, despite family rejection. Not one member of my family called to congratulate me. The silence was perfect. As I sat in Grandpa's old office, now redecorated with photos of Sarah and me from our travels and achievements, I smiled thinking about his final words. He'd been right about real treasure. It wasn't the money, though that certainly helped. It was the freedom to live authentically, the power to choose my own family, and the knowledge that I'd built something meaningful from their rejection. My phone buzzed with another message from Jessica. "We should really get together soon. There's so much to catch up on. Family is so important." I deleted it without responding. Outside my window, construction crews were breaking ground on the new affordable housing development I'd funded. Inside, Sarah was reviewing applications for our mentorship program, helping young people build careers without family support. We were building a legacy that had nothing to do with the Walsh family name and everything to do with the values Grandpa had tried to instill in me, that worth isn't measured by others' approval, that real treasure comes from staying true to yourself, and that sometimes the best revenge is building something so beautiful that the people who tried to diminish you become completely irrelevant. They were right about one thing, though. Grandpa had known exactly what I was worth. He'd just been measuring a completely different currency than they'd imagined. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about overcoming family rejection and discovering your own strength. Remember, the people who underestimate you today might be asking for favors tomorrow. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming so successful that their opinion of you becomes completely irrelevant. And the most beautiful part? I never had to tell them where the money came from. Let them spend the rest of their lives wondering how the family disappointment became the family success story they'd never be able to claim credit for. That mystery was my final gift to myself, and the sweetest revenge of all.